I hadn't even realized that there was a Bank of Palestine and there's like a Palestinian stock exchange.
The tech ecosystem and firmly believes that it's, again, coming back to that thesis that a future Palestinian state's economy is going to have to work across borders and take advantage of the fact that Palestinians are some of the best educated people in the world, and they can work across borders. They speak English. They can really, really engage with the world economy that way. And that, yeah, tech ICT is going to have to be part of that growth story.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to the IFG channel. I am Ibrahim Khan, and with me I have a very special guest today. We're going to be talking about all things to do with the tech ecosystem in the Middle East, the tech ecosystem specifically in Palestine, and how we can potentially help out with what's happening over there right now, as well as the broader story that Ryan Sturgill has to share with us. So Ryan is a really, really intriguing man. Ryan, you're a principal at Cross Boundary. You're an investment advisor to the Bank of Palestine, former director at Gaza Sky Geeks, which was, I think, the only accelerator, a big tech hub in Gaza, which unfortunately now is razed to the ground. And you're currently raising, and this is how we met, you're currently raising the Safe Palestine, which is a fundraising facility to help Palestinian startups to be able to survive what's a very, very difficult time for them right now. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So we're going to get into all of the stuff around the fundraising and the Safe Palestine and how all of that works. But I wanted to kind of rewind all the way back to Chicago, which is where you grew up, right? And you were very exposed to the Palestinian history and politics from the early ages. I'd love to hear, a little bit more about your upbringing.
Sure. Yeah, it's somewhat of a long-winded story. I don't have an easy sort of elevator pitch for how I ended up working in Palestine, but it does go back, to a pretty young age. Grew up on the south side of Chicago, around where the University of Chicago is, and I don't have family that are from the region, but wound up there because parents were affiliated with the university, and grew up around a lot of friends who were Jewish, but also large Palestinian population in Chicago, and was fortunate to also grow up around the Khalidi family, Rashid Khalidi and his wife Mona and their kids, who went to my school. He's one of the most prominent Palestinian academics in the world today, and was at the University of Chicago then. And just through sort of discussions around the dinner table, family, at school, I just got aware of what was happening in Palestine from a relatively young age. And then that sort of sparked a I guess, longer term interest that was also sort of tied up with kind of coming of age and post 9/11 era, which happened when I was in high school, and America then sort of going off on these misadventures throughout the Middle East. And sort of with all of that, really led to a strong desire to really understand more deeply sort of what life was like for people here in the region, and that led to academic interests that sort of snowballed from there. And once you sort of start studying Arabic, then you really are kind of in it. Moved when I was, I guess, even sort of discussions around Israel, Palestine, and interest in the Middle East drove my decision for university, where I started studying Arabic, and led me to go live in Egypt for a while. And really, that was the first time that I visited Palestine in 2005. Just, not too long after the Second Intifada, and before a lot of the walls and separation barriers that exist today went up. And that was my first real exposure to actually being, uh, seeing what a checkpoint was like, waiting in line with my mom to go to Bethlehem and places like that. And then um, and then in university also, I worked on a book about negotiations and between Israel and its neighbors and America's role in that, which was a really illuminating experience, just interviewing so many people who were involved in the politics of the region for so many years. So really had kind of immersed myself fully in it, sort of academically, very involved in advocacy when I was at university at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. But then my career took a little bit of a turn, or I guess my career ended up starting off in a different direction, somewhat sort of serendipitously. Ended up working on Wall Street right after school, and at the time was realizing I just know a lot about politics and know nothing about how the world of finance works, and maybe also if I want to have an impact in helping people in the region, that knowing a little bit about how one makes a livelihood would be useful. So ended up working in finance on Wall Street for a number of years, but always kind of had the ambition of making my way back, which is another story.
And Ryan, I'm intrigued by the interviews that you did as part of you writing a book about the peace negotiations in the Middle East. What were the insights you took away from that? What doesn't meet the eye when most people engage with that subject or give a cursory glance to it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one is sort of looking at it also from the angle of U.S. foreign policy and like when was America effective in actually helping bring some resolution, some conclusion with peace negotiations, whether it was with Egypt or Jordan or later attempts and failures, to try and negotiate a deal between Israelis and Palestinians. Really, if there is really strong willpower there and closeness between president and secretary of state and deep levels of trust, that they can, like the US has been effective in the past. But the kind of premise, retrospective of the book that was written by former peace negotiator Aaron David Miller, called The Much Too Promised Land, sort of admits right from the get-go, and him reflecting on his own experiences, that far too often the US was basically acted as Israel's lawyer in all of these negotiations. And times when we were effective actually, required us taking a more even-handed approach and being very tough with the Israelis. I think the other thing that was illuminating for me also was kind of for the first time understanding and like developing empathy also for the perspective of people on the Israeli side who, also had legitimate fears and concerns and desires to live a better, simpler life and prosperous life, and seeing the way that kind of off camera and outside of the main center stage, like these people actually could all get together in a room and negotiate and treat each other with respect and professionalism, and had great mutual respect for each other, even if their views really differed. And so I think kind of as I think it helped me think more about maybe become more dispassionate in sort of my angsty youth, doing a lot of advocacy, really sort of railing against what I still today think is sort of patently, an unjust situation and occupation in Palestine. But I think a realization that to be effective and get outcomes that are sort of best for everyone and sort of achieving some objectives requires like a degree of dispassion and at least maybe mutual recognition of why views are the way they are on the other side and what is sort of the trauma or history and background that informs their politics and decision making. So I think it developed sort of a healthy respect for the vantage points that all the different stakeholders in the region, brought to the table, whether Syrian, Egyptian, Palestinian, Israeli, or American.
And Ryan, how did you end up from working on Wall Street back in the region and ending up of all places in the Gaza Strip?
So I think when so when I was leaving university, I don't know, maybe I still joke like I was like a bull market hire. So I came in, sort of before the housing crisis and finished my university in 2007, right when things were at the crest. And but so I had this opportunity sort of that opened up very early on in university, and I really didn't know what I was doing. I like a logical thing for me would have been to go like work for the government or something, given all this history and policy knowledge. But George W. Bush was in charge in the U.S. at the time. That didn't seem very appealing to me. And this opportunity opened up to go work at J.P. Morgan, and around that time as well, I was really sort of starting to believe that, really what underlying a lot of strife and conflict throughout the world, whether in the Middle East or elsewhere, like comes from also just economic insecurity. And so like ultimately, I mean, political rights and economic rights like have to go hand in hand, but not knowing really anything about sort of what people need to sort of, basically make their daily bread and feel secure and comfortable. It's when people don't have that, that's when people become susceptible to populism and all sorts of other dangerous political ideologies and, potentially resort to violence. And I thought that, okay, learning something about finance and, how does a small business work? How do you help an entrepreneur give someone a paycheck that they can go home and feed their family with, that is something that will be valuable. And so even though I did not necessarily have intentions of becoming like pinstripe suit Wall Street investment banker, I really thought of it as like an extension of my education, and it was a great education. So I sort of wrote out the financial crisis and always kind of had the idea that I would try to transition back to the Middle East, which I fell in love with when I traveled around when I was a student. There was a lot of really interesting growth happening in Dubai in sort of early days for Dubai and its sort of major takeoff. Terrible time to be looking for a job though, with the housing and credit crisis sort of still lingering in the 2010s, I think. And I was going to go back to grad school to study economic development and entrepreneurship. And at the last minute, I got a call to basically go do financial evaluations for factories in Iraq with the US government. And I had spent the previous like 3 years in a cubicle and, young, single, looking for adventure, and deferred grad school and moved to Iraq. And, and that felt important to me. And I think coming full circle from sort of almost a decade previous and watching the US invade Iraq and wanting to sort of be a part of rebuilding that, and trying to repair some of the damage that my country had done, felt like a compelling a good thing to do. As it turns out, I ended up only working there for about 6 months as part of the broader like withdrawal of the American presence there during the Obama administration, and quickly was either going to be out of a job or I was offered the opportunity to go to Afghanistan. And so I spent actually 2 years in Afghanistan managing a variety of different development projects, and that kind of was a exposure to pretty resource constrained context where the traditional like finance, like trying to facilitate investment into factories was not happening because there really weren't that many factories. So I ended up like repaving roads, repaving airplane tarmacs, starting a small business incubator there, actually with some support from Google. And that led to sort of a first encounter with some people at Google who ended up actually being very pivotal in helping get Gaza Sky Geeks off the ground, which is the tech hub initiative that I ran for 6 years later in Palestine.
Yeah. So Ryan, before we go to that, I'd love to hear more about Afghanistan. Like, what was it like coming in, and what was it like to live in as someone who, like most people, I think just see it on the news as like a big bad scary place. What was your experience of it?
I feel very lucky the experience that I had because I actually had a lot of freedom to move around, and so lived in the west of the country in Herat, near the Iranian and Turkmenistan border. It's a city on the Silk Road, beautiful city, beautiful surroundings, and really, I love the country, and it was really also kind of the place at the time that was like the most normal as well in that period. So like the 2010 to 2012, there was a lot of trade, a lot of business going on, transit coming through, these old Silk Road roads that needed to be repaved. And so even just like preventing truck accidents on these highways, truckers carrying goods felt like that was helping improve the economy. And I really loved and appreciated my time there, and just worked with some amazing people who were great. And seeing what happened then in 2021, and how many of those people actually then were in danger and stuck. Still had a lot of friends who were remaining in Afghanistan, and had worked with international community and then were under threat from the Taliban. Did a lot then to also try to help get people out and get access to aid. And in many ways, it feels like sort of flashbacks to what we're seeing right now. But yeah, it was a special place. It's where I met my wife, and we both departed Afghanistan around the same time. Went back to grad school, and to kind of reflect on that whole experience. And the downside of that experience was just seeing the colossal waste that the international community, the amount of money, lives, and time invested into trying to help Afghanistan. There were so many things that I observed that were not helping at all, and destructive as well, I thought, in terms of just how aid was being and policies were being implemented on the ground.
Can you give an example?
Just structural things like the focus on trying to build like a strong central Afghan government, which had never existed before and didn't have buy-in from any of the provinces, and the economic financial structure of how tax revenues would be distributed made no sense in terms of engendering goodwill. And so there were these very structural things that never really were addressed. by the US and, the other powers there, that felt like they were always kind of setting sort of bigger macro picture and foundation that you were trying to build a new Afghan economy and Afghan state on were not being addressed. These very powerful incumbent, former either warlords or power figures in these different parts in the south or the west of Afghanistan. The power sharing with those leaders was never really done properly or acknowledged, right? So like while there were these little pockets of good things happening around the country, there were these just major structural issues that weren't addressed. And then seeing all of the international community come in and cycle through on these rotations that lasted like 6 to 9 months, whether it was aid workers or military people or diplomats. Ironically, like by the time I left Herat, I think I was like the first or second longest expat resident in the city. And I was only there for 2 years, just because so many people like cycled through, and every time you met, it was like no institutional memory for anybody who was trying to actually do economic development. And poor Afghans, entrepreneurs or businesses would be told one thing, and then the person they were dealing with would go back home or on to their next post, if they were interacting with somebody from the UN or the US or something. So yeah, just a lot of these structural things that really were going to set a lot of these initiatives to try to help the economy and the state, set them up for failure. And I just also saw, I think one of the lessons that I took away from that time is like there's power in just like sticking around and like investing in a place. And I think that was something that I really resolved to do, that if I was going to try to go someplace else to try to be helpful, what is not helpful is essentially just parachuting in and spending a year or 2 or 3 even, because, then by the time you're leaving, it's like you just figured out what to do and you're not effective. So yeah, so anyway, that sort of like those experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan and Wall Street, like all sort of combined to, I guess, inform what I did later in Palestine. And did eventually go back and I deferred a number of times going back to grad school and studied development economics and entrepreneurship in emerging markets, and wasn't sure exactly like what I would do when I finished grad school in 2015. I did an MBA and a policy degree in 3 years, and Palestine had even sort of like receded a bit in my mind. But then I ended up taking a trip with my grad school class back to Palestine. I don't know, there was something there was one of these, grad student treks, and there's a few, to different places around the world. And yeah, very end of my time, Palestine trek popped up, and I just like felt like I should go back and witness, again. And I went back, and I remember like walking down the street and talking to my wife on the phone, and just after again seeing how things had deteriorated, like the situation had sort of worsened, and the build out of walls and checkpoints that were even so much more significant than when I was last there in 2005. I just, felt like I told my wife, like, I think this is an issue that we need to come back. We need to come back and work on. And lo and behold, we did. So yeah, we moved back in 2015, and yeah, really tried to stay as long as we could then to make an impact.
And how was your time in Gaza?
So yeah, the privilege of running Gaza Sky Geeks, it was, one of the best things I think I'll ever do in my life. I mean, it was remarkable and unique in so many ways. I mean, one, just Gaza is an amazing place for those who haven't been, and it is hard to go. It's hard to access. Since Hamas won the Palestinian legislative elections in 2006, and a bit of a civil war between Fatah and Hamas, and the imposition of a blockade in 2007, really nobody other than like diplomats and NGO workers and journalists have been able to go in and out of Gaza. And most Gazans haven't been able to leave. The movement of goods has also been restricted. And coupled with that, numerous wars over the years that had decimated the infrastructure. There was really a huge amount of deprivation, and something like 80% of the population dependent on aid. But it's a really special place. Sort of, I say Gaza City reminds me of Cairo in some ways. It's a bustling, dense, sort of 24/7 city with great universities. And, I'm saying this in the present tense because I don't know, I don't want to accept that all these things are gone. But yeah, they are gone now. But the thing that really convinced me to go and attracted me specifically to Gaza was this thesis that I still believe in, that there are a lot of very smart people studying computer science, studying engineering, coming out of the universities in Palestine and specifically in Gaza. And most people don't know this, but like the one really good piece of infrastructure in Gaza was the fiber internet. So even though Israelis had restricted the telecom equipment that enters Gaza to still only have 2G connectivity, while the rest of the world is onto 5G, there was fiber internet and Wi-Fi. And so if you had a car battery to power your laptop even during power cuts because fuel would get cut off and the grid couldn't be maintained, there'd only be sometimes 2 hours of electricity a day. If you had a battery and you could connect your laptop and you could be on, you could get connectivity, because with fiber, you don't necessarily need electricity to run the packets through the line. If you could just power your router, you could be working with anybody in the global economy. So I thought that there was real talent there. I knew about the talent there. I knew about the potential of the internet for people to build businesses online, and really overcoming those barriers of physically being in a place, but the digital economy providing all this opportunity was just one that I thought that was a unique way that I could come in and support. And so when I came in, it was really helping startups, entrepreneurs figure out how to get their first investments, like how to structure deals, negotiating with an angel investor or a VC fund in the region to invest in a seed stage startup. When I was there, we decided that also, in addition to helping startups, we should really try to provide blanket support to anybody who wanted to earn an income online. This would help startups, but also help people more broadly. So helping people freelance online, teaching people how to code from scratch, and then also helping more advanced software developers get jobs with global companies in remote positions, even pre-COVID, remote work from Gaza, freelancing or like as a remote employee for a Saudi company or a UK company was very in vogue, because Gazans had to get online really very early, like after 2007, and trying to hustle and make a living in the online economy. So everybody there was like very fluent in remote work and working with people all around the globe and working with different cultures. And so like those are just some of the special attributes that Gaza in particular had with online work and launching startups.
And what used to happen at Gaza Sky Geeks, Ryan? And how big was the team there? And did you have offices? What was it like?
Yeah, we had really cool offices. We ultimately ended up we grew from a small apartment in Gaza City to a bigger sort of fit for purpose co-working space that saw foot traffic. And then we were open to the public. Then and after 2016, we launched sort of big open co-working spaces that had graffiti on the walls designed by local artists, and we made it open to the public. We really just wanted to encourage anybody who was interested in learning about tech to walk in the door. And then we later expanded into Khan Yunis with an office there with a similar vibe. And we kind of had like a whole tech ecosystem like under one roof. So training rooms, hot desks, little companies, startup companies renting offices, or a back office for a Saudi tech company or a UAE tech company would be there. Design, online marketing trainings going on. Students also just like doing their homework. We were tried to just be very welcoming, very inclusive, because and really try to foster a community that could help the community members teach other community members and be very peer-led. This was, I think, a nice idea because community and peer-led stuff is great. But we also had no money in the very beginning when I took over. We had very little money. So we only had about 2 or 3 other employees who we paid. We had a lot of people who volunteered. But by the time I left after 6 years in 2021, we had something like 40 full-time salaried folks, and maybe another 20 to 30 contracted who would come and do mentorship and training. And then built a very big volunteer community outside. So again, because we needed as many people as we could to come in and help, because we were affiliated with Mercy Corps, which is an international NGO, they were able to help us get permits to bring people in and out. So we would take advantage of people from Silicon Valley, coming on, say they had somebody from Google, maybe who had a business trip in Tel Aviv or something. We could get them for a week, come in and run a software engineering training. And we built up cadence. We probably were bringing in 5 or 6 international mentors a month. And though a lot of those people also then became ambassadors for Palestine, for the Palestinian tech sector, they would get a sticker that they'd put on their laptop and go back to some co-working space on Mission Street in San Francisco or London. And it started to become, sort of a more widely known thing. And we started to build partnerships. Google, from very early on, backed us, and we were part of the Google for Startups network. Built partnerships with other tech companies and Techstars Foundation and Coca-Cola and others. And then, even to the point then, by the time I left, we had much bigger partnerships, even with the UK government, and a few other European ones as well. So it grew quite a bit and was really great operation. But by the time we left, I think I was just talking with one of my former employees who made it out of Gaza, and by the start of the war in October, people that we trained in coding were earning $5 million a year collectively after 12 months after we trained them and graduated them. So I had a lot to be proud of. We grew that a lot. It was also running a startup itself. And that was a journey for me personally as a leader and a manager. growing a team, and while trying to also help other startups that grow their teams. So yeah, tremendously rewarding, really exciting, and also again like kind of this privileged position where, again, because I'm a American male guy with a U.S. passport, kind of like had all the right papers, and so I had it about as easy as possible in terms of being able to traverse Gaza, Jerusalem, Ramallah, Nablus, Hebron, Tel Aviv, like, and just I think the last thing I'll mention on it was just struck by like how close like all of these different people are to each other, but they can never interact with each other. Whether it was the communities right outside of Gaza in Israel that used to interact before the walls went up, or even people in the West Bank not being able to go and visit Gaza, to the point that now, a whole generation of Palestinians have grown up and in the West Bank saying they've never been to Gaza. They don't know anybody there. So I'd go to Ramallah and people would ask me what Gaza was like, which, yeah, just really, and then in Gaza as well, like an entire generation of people who've never been able to leave Gaza. Most of the people I worked with had never actually been outside, never been on a plane before. And so I got to kind of witness and share experiences sort of across borders and kind of bear witness to the very different lives that those people were leading.
And Ryan, I have to ask, like, what's the, you were there for several years. What's the governance situation there? Because, now we see it. The whole thing is destroyed, obviously. But there's this whole thing about, Hamas, Israel, Hamas are terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. But what was it like, we use the word terrorist in the same way that we would use it for, I don't know, Al Qaeda or ISIS or, the guys who did 9/11. What was your lived experience like?
Yeah, so it's Hamas, which is a social movement, an Islamic social movement that has many other non-military aspects to it, roots in the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, going back to the 80s. And it it was moving towards being a political party and won these elections in 2006, because it had built up a reputation of not being corrupt, providing social services where, its rivals were not. And after 2007, yeah, so they were the ruling authority in Gaza with full control over everything. The complete isolation that ensued with the blockade and cutoff, did not do anything to moderate or help with any sort of actual governance in Gaza, over the past, 16 years, 17 years. Yeah, Hamas, the government in Gaza ran, a lot of things functioned like other places, municipal services, garbage gets picked up. People go to school, like the people go to restaurants. Again, I say it felt kind of like Cairo, but it wasn't like by any means an easy place to live at all. The lack of goods, the lack of ability to travel, all of these things that no more sort of a byproduct of the blockade, I would say, and the lack of opportunity were things that were really, really hard for people living there. I'll say for personally, Hamas was horrible to to me and to Gaza Sky Geeks. I mean, they were very paranoid about the fact that we brought people in from outside, very like afraid and paranoid that we were cultivating spies. We had lots of harassment by the intelligence and other authorities of our employees. We ran a mixed, co-ed mixed gender co-working space, which they were not happy about. Yeah, we had laptops confiscated, our offices shut, events shut down, employees detained and interrogated, and so really scary stuff. I mean, I would say that was one of the harder aspects of running Gaza Sky Geeks while I was there, is just being under the kind of the watchful eye and of an authority that's very paranoid, because even though you're there trying to help create opportunity for people, there's this deep insularity and paranoia by the Hamas authorities of anything outside of Gaza. And so, yeah.
And Ryan, how do you think the Hamas compares with the Taliban? Because you're probably one of the few people who could actually make that comparison.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would say, from my experience, if I could sum up like what my own personal experience of Afghanistan was, I think that the Taliban essentially, or whatever we called the Taliban, was essentially just a stand-in noun for anything that was not the central international backed government. And whether they were formally controlled by the Taliban, I mean, it became just anybody who wanted to resist the international Western backed government got labeled Taliban, whether there was a strong affiliation or not. So I think that became like a big bogeyman for just a lot of people and militants who did have legitimate grievances with the central government coming in and imposing things rightly or wrongly and where they were, and who were resisting. So that's how I would sort of summarize the way we characterize the Taliban, and still, I think, do to this day. In Gaza, again, they won these elections in 2006, but where there was a plurality of support for them. But the majority of people in Gaza today weren't even born in 2006. That was one election, and so a lot of people throw this nonsense around that they voted for Hamas and therefore they're somehow getting what they deserve, or I mean, the majority of the population is like under 18. Most of them have never been outside of Gaza or had any other alternative to it. And, I would say certainly among like educated middle class people, like a lot of the people who were in my milieu, I would say antipathy towards Hamas, antipathy towards Fatah and the PA, or at least from what they would read about it, even though they weren't necessarily governed by it. The government in Ramallah. And more than anything, what I would hear is just people wanting opportunity, like the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to go have a scholarship, be able to go to Jaffa and go to the beach and visit where their grandparents were from. That was like a refrain that I heard over and over, and just so many people, I think, who felt dejected by the political situation and seeing really no alternative forward. So definitely not, I did not see any Hamas supporters sort of in the middle classes and educated classes that I interacted with mostly. Just a huge amount of desire for basic freedom of movement.
And Ryan, fast forwarding to where we are today, my understanding is that these offices are all gone. Like, this is I think a lot of what was built, apart from perhaps some of the human resource, a lot of it is gone, if not all of it. How does that make you
Yeah.
feel?
Uh, I'm devastated to see and hear about the people I know that have died, and the buildings and the community. I mean, I don't regret doing 1 second of it. I still am so proud of like what my team there has done and continues to do today. I mean, they continue to do work and help out and distribute aid and help people activate eSIMs, the sort of tech savvy community. And that will reconstitute itself in some way. I feel, this what I work. We were not just a like a school or a training program, but it was a real community, and I feel very good that like that's not something that the bombings can kill really, unless they really manage to kill everybody. But yeah, I am proud of what I see them doing right now in Gaza, and I wish I was there to help them. It's very sad to see like our offices and the homes of all my employees being destroyed and family members being lost. But I'm trying to stay busy by working on some of the initiatives that like Safe Palestine and a few other volunteer things that we've managed to do to help people there.
Let's talk about that in a second, and perhaps it's all linked up anyway. But Ryan, what do you think? What do you think the rebuild looks like? Like what, someone like yourself who put in so much effort and hard work into building Gaza Sky Geeks, and then every so often Israel comes in and mows the lawn, so to speak. Um, it, at some level, it seems quite, futile, right? At some level, because you're like, okay, well, these guys are going to come and do this all over again. But yeah, I'd love to hear your reactions to that sentiment, but then also your reactions to, what does the future hold, and like how best should we try and help the Palestinians?
Mm-hmm. The lack of movement, like over the past 17 years in the political situation, the lack of any substantive talks and active work to sort of kill the idea of a Palestinian state. It's hugely discouraging, and it led a lot of people, especially after the Egyptian border became a little bit more open after 2019, really led to a lot of brain drain because a lot of people just didn't see opportunity for their kids. And these are talented, smart people who could potentially find work outside, or could sustain in another country if they could get a residency. So seeing like the attrition of that community, and people leaving Gaza, leaving Palestine, really and that felt very familiar, vividly, something that we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq, and in a lot of these places that have fallen to conflict. Just a lot of those who can, and the best and brightest are able to move on and leave. So the still the thing that I think kept me believing in the idea, the mission, is that ultimately, like, I do believe like there will have to be some sort of state, some polity arrangement where Palestinians will, have some governance and political rights. And I really do believe that like the experience that we were providing them in Gaza Sky Geeks, like entrepreneurs that we would run through our startup accelerator, was really like the best leadership training ground I think that we could give a young person in Palestine. I think like the growth, not just like of the businesses that we worked with, but like the entrepreneurs who like really became leaders in their own right. And like those, I would even think of it as sort of like a personal leadership accelerator, because like whether their startup like went on to succeed or fail or raise another round, like I felt really proud of the transformation that we saw in the entrepreneurs that we worked with, and how they grew as people, and like still believe to this day like a lot of the people that we worked with and cultivated like will be leaders of whatever that future Palestine is.
Ryan, talk to me a little bit about what the Bank of Palestine is, and I mean, to be honest, I hadn't even realized that there was a Bank of Palestine and there's like a Palestinian stock exchange and all these things exist. Talk to us a little bit about these, I guess the financial infrastructure and institutions out there, and then yeah, I'd love to hear more about the Safe for Palestine as well.
Yeah, so the Bank of Palestine, it's to be clear, it's not government affiliated. It's not like a central bank. Like it's the largest, oldest commercial bank in Palestine. Actually founded in Gaza, so it has its strong roots there, and its business about evenly divided between the West Bank and Gaza. It holds about a third of all deposits of the bank's Palestinian population. And it's, yeah, a very well-run, well-regarded bank that even a lot of, the European and US governments have invested a lot into to build up as a solid financial institution to support a Palestinian state. Received a lot of support like from the US Treasury Department over the years to have really top-notch compliance and anti-money laundering protocols in place. And it's a well-run institution that is, correspondent banks with in the UK and the US. And it's also, like some of the biggest Palestinian companies, very involved in social works as well. It's, one of the big institutions that invests a huge amount in corporate social responsibility, and has made a particularly strong investment in the innovation economy. The Bank of Palestine actually used to support Gaza Sky Geeks. It has its own incubator program now called Intersect Innovation Hub. It supports all sorts of various tech initiatives, inclusive small business initiatives for women. So it's invested quite a lot in the tech ecosystem, and firmly believes that it's, again, coming back to that thesis that a future Palestinian state's economy is going to have to work across borders and take advantage of the fact that Palestinians are some of the best educated people in the world, and they can work across borders. They speak English. They can really, really engage with the world economy that way. And that, yeah, tech ICT is going to have to be part of that growth story. So they've made it, for years, they've made investments in supporting the tech ecosystem. And it's, yeah, definitely a strong priority for them.
And Ryan, what are you up to with the Safe for Palestine? How is that going to help Palestinians and startups in the region?
So Safe Palestine is a bridge fund for Palestinian startups that is anchored by the Bank of Palestine as the first investor in it. And the idea is to support Palestinian startups, not just through charity or grants, but startups that actually have made quite a bit of headway and traction. They've already proven that they have product market fit and a clear value proposition such that venture capital firms have already invested in them. or other regional accelerators have invested in them, or they've got a significant amount of monthly recurring revenue if they've bootstrapped. These are startups that have kind of made a huge amount of progress pushing the tech ecosystem forward, run by some of the brightest lights in Palestine. They could work elsewhere, not the easiest place to start a startup, but these entrepreneurs want to be in Palestine, launch their global business from Palestine. And they also potentially really have been the most set back because either they had engineers in Gaza, the market just climate is not great for like launching a new feature or product. It wasn't a great venture funding environment before October 7th, and it's not now, especially with I think misconceptions about Palestinian businesses and what it's like to run a business from Palestine. So yeah, estimated with some folks at the Bank of Palestine that probably startups have been set back by about 9 to 12 months because of the conflict, because of all of those potential issues that I raised. Same with the ongoing violence in the West Bank. I mean, settlers and the military blocking roads and the ability to get goods in and out. A number of businesses that might have like a hardware component have been affected by that. Ability to travel and meet with investors has been hindered. So the idea was to try to basically throw a line of liquidity to some of these startups that have real promise, not just to survive, but actually thrive and go on to run good businesses and also potentially have a return for those who come to invest right now. So this is a bridge facility that is meant to be quick, low cost. It's being supported by the Bank of Palestine, so there's no management fees and no management carry. It's a special purpose vehicle that will take commitments very quickly and turn around and deploy the capital very quickly to startups that are eligible and extend them basically a bridge equity loan through a simple agreement for future equity, so SAFEs, with 20% discount and no cap. So we've been working hard to raise this $5 million pool of capital. We've got 20% of it is gonna probably end up being a grant component. We've got support from Google and the Bank of Palestine kind of anchoring it. Google will put in $1 million of grant funding, and then we've been working through basically going out to the market and trying to gain equity commitments for the special purpose vehicle that will invest in about 25 startups.
Amazing. And if people want to support this endeavor, at some point it will be on the Curate platform as well, God willing. But if they want to get involved now, what should they do? Are there ways that they can get involved now?
Yeah, we're looking for tickets $25,000 and above. So just to kind of make the administration and ongoing reporting expenses somewhat manageable. And we've partnered with Zest Equity to streamline the KYC process and accept commitments. So we're trying to digitize and automate as much of that as possible. Those who are in the Curate community or other kind of syndicates, I think, can come in that way. And so more will be, I think, forthcoming on how people can participate that way. But yeah, the easiest way is to get in touch with me, and we can share our investor presentation. We can talk through any questions that folks might have, and then we can just direct them to the Zest platform where they can access all of the subscription docs and make a commitment.
Amazing. Ryan, it's been a pleasure and an honor to spend time with you. I think we need more people like you who are, I guess, consistent in their sincere help for the region that we're talking about, and also bring to bear a lot of the skill sets, the diverse skill sets that you've got in ways that are, I think, unique to what you can do. And then, people like us need to support you in facilitating that. So yeah, I thank you from my side, and I guess from many people for the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure. And Ramadan Kareem.
Ramadan Kareem to you as well.